1-1. Stay tuned for an exclusive interview with President Nixon's new Chief of Staff, Alexander Haig, and a profile of Senator Inouye, next on Channel 2.
Toyota's little pickup has the biggest engine in its class. And Toyota asked an independent test lab to see what all that power did to its gas mileage. The results were an impressive 22 miles per gallon, even with non-professional drivers. Good gas mileage and the biggest engine in its class. Only Toyota offers you both. See your Toyota dealer and see how much truck your money can buy.
Chewing gum can be fun when the taste is the one that tastes so double good. Double mint will do it, 'cause it's double good all through it. Everybody, double mint, double good, double mint. Chewing gum, the taste is double good. Double mint will do it. Get some double mint and chew it. Double mint chewing gum.
Don't ask for orange, ask for Crush. Don't ask for orange, ask for Crush. The fresher, cleaner, brighter taste of Crush. There's only one. There's only one. For 50 years there's only been one. Orange Crush taste. The fresher, cleaner, brighter taste you only get with Crush. There's only one. Don't ask for orange, ask for Crush.
KNXT, Los Angeles.
You're Chief of Staff in the White House. Let's say that tomorrow you learned that Anthony Ulasewicz or somebody like him had been hired by one of your subordinates to check up on the drinking habits and the sexual habits, if you will, of a political opponent. What would you do?
Well, I don't think that's the kind of thing that I'd tolerate.
You'd fire him?
I don't think that that's appropriate business for the White House.
This week was not the first time U.S. Senator Daniel Inouye had heard racial insults. After losing his arm in World War II, wearing his captain's uniform, his chest full of ribbons, the American war hero asked a California barber for a haircut.
He says, "You're a Jap?" I says, "No, I'm an American." He says, "But you're a Jap?" I says, "Well, if you mean what my parents were," I said, "Yeah, my father was born in Japan. We don't cut Jap hair here."
A normal cricket match takes 5 days to play. Each day's session lasts 8 hours, including various lunch and tea intervals. And after all that, it's not uncommon to have no result.
I'm Wally Safer. I'm Mike Wallace. Those stories and more tonight on 60 Minutes.
This portion of 60 Minutes is sponsored by
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
The other night, my wife and I went to this party at Charlie's house. There were a lot of people there, but I noticed that Charlie spent most of the evening talking to this one fella. And I mean really bending his ear, you know. Well, I finally got Charlie alone, and I asked him who he was talking to. And he said it was his insurance man. So I said, "Charlie, do you mean to tell me your insurance man actually listened to you all that time without saying anything?" And he said, "Yeah. He's with the Northwestern. That's the 7th largest life insurance company in the country. And those fellas really listen to what you have to say." So I gave this fella a call yesterday, and you know what? Charlie was right. He really listened to me. And he answered all my questions straight out. So I called Charlie, and I said, "Charlie, how come you never told me about this fella before?" And he said, "I did, months ago. But you weren't listening."
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
This was the week that Bob Haldeman, the man who used to be President Nixon's chief of staff, spent 3 days up on Capitol Hill talking about Watergate. Meanwhile, back at the White House on Wednesday, Bob Haldeman's replacement as Chief of Staff, General Alexander Haig, took time out to talk to us. Haig is now the man at the president's right hand, deciding who gets in to see the president and who doesn't, what is important enough to get the president's attention and what isn't. Haig is now the advisor, the administrator, and the paper pusher that Bob Haldeman used to be. He spends more time with the president than anyone else on the White House staff. Alexander Haig, now 48 years old, was a mere lieutenant colonel when I first met him in Vietnam just 6 years ago. 3 days ago, when he retired as Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, he was a 4-star general. It had been one of the swiftest rises to the top in Army history. A West Point graduate, a combat veteran of Korea as well as Vietnam. For 4 years, Al Haig was Henry Kissinger's Kissinger, his chief aide, then his deputy on the National Security Council. Haig's first-hand knowledge of the way the Nixon White House works, his familiarity with the people and the bureaucracy there, recommended him to Mr. Nixon when Bob Haldeman had to go. Would you explain something to me? What is it that you do for the president? Do you schedule the president's day? Are you an advisor to the president? Are you a paper pusher? What is it that Al Haig does?
All those things, Mike. But what I consider to be the most important aspect of my position is to be sure that the president gets all of the viewpoints on a given issue, a policy issue. To be sure that he has received the best advice available, not only within the bureaucracy, but out of the bureaucracy.
Well, General Haig, with your background, quarter century in the Army, and living on military posts, and 4 years in the White House, what in the world do you know of the cities, of minorities, of labor and business, of the intellectual community, of the arts? In other words, what is your training that gives you the savvy to say, Mr. President, you ought to see this fellow, or listen to that point of view, or read this piece of paper?
Mike, if I ever assumed that attitude, in other words, that I could be the expert on the areas you described, I would be very remiss, and I think not serve the president properly. On the other hand, we have within the White House staff and within the cabinet and within the bureaucracy the experts who do know these subjects. And what I consider myself to be primarily is a transmission belt, an expediter, and a facilitator of ensuring that these views get to the president at the right time, and to be sure that if there is a divergent view, that it is available for the president to consider.
Well, now wait.
He decides.
Yeah, but you decide who's going to get to see the president still. Like Haldeman decided, so does Haig decide. No one gets to see the president, I suppose, with the exception of Kissinger. What about,
No, I wouldn't want to portray my role that sharply either. The president has senior advisors. He has Henry Kissinger. He has Mel Laird, Bryce Harlow, Ann Armstrong, Bill Timpkins.
They don't have to go through you to get to him?
No, absolutely not.
All of these people can get to see the president without going through Al Haig.
Yes, now be sure that you know, Mike, that we're not running anarchy here, bureaucratic anarchy. At president's time is crucial. What generally is the procedure is that one of these people who wishes to see the president about an important matter informs me beforehand. I tell the president, and we schedule it.
And the president's schedule, says Haig, impressions to the contrary notwithstanding. The president's schedule has been jam-packed the past 3 months. Haig pointed out that despite his illness, Mr. Nixon has been able to meet with 10 heads of state. He has held 8 formal cabinet meetings, met with 14 major congressional groups, taken 6 major trips, including one to Iceland, and
he's given 7 major addresses to the American people.
How many news conferences has he held?
He's had none, and I'm glad you asked that question. We're not naive about the problem of news conferences, and I don't think the president is. However, we've been in a period of calculated defense, in the sense that the president has been the victim of a number of charges and innuendo that have been, I think, carried very extensively in the American press, particularly during the period just preceding John Dean's testimony, where I, as a new incumbent in the White House, was somewhat startled to note a pattern of charges emerging late on a Saturday afternoon in one of our major media, newspaper or magazine, in which it was alleged that John Dean would testify that the president had met with him on 40 occasions to plot cover-up for Watergate, or that the president had specifically authorized the expenditure of $1 million to keep witnesses quiet in the post-Watergate period. And this is just one of countless charges that were made during that period. And the president moved out and refuted in detail each of these charges. An unending process.
If he had.
If he had. An unending process would have begun in which the president's credibility would sooner or later have been gravely damaged.
Well, it's already been gravely damaged. 3 out of 4 people in the United States, according to the Gallup poll, believe that the president either knew about Watergate itself or the cover-up. So that the credibility issue is not met really by that, General Haig, because a lot of Americans have lost faith in the president.
I accept that, Mike, and I certainly understand the reason for it. You know, the American people are incredibly smart. I've never known them not to come very close to the truth after the dialectic process of swinging from one extreme to the other, which I think we all tend to do on issues, especially one like this.
Right.
Now, at this phase, I think we all have to keep in mind that the president has been in a calculated period of restraint, where he has done very little to specifically answer the allegations beyond his statement of May 22nd.
Well, when's this phase going to end, General?
Now, I think that it will end with the completion of the testimony of the key witnesses under oath, which is occurring now in the Senate committee.
What you seem to be saying is that sometime in the next few days, within a week, the president is going to speak out.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily set that deadline, but I would say that we're talking about a period of 1 to 3 weeks at the outside.
In what forum?
Here again, we're considering this problem very, very carefully, and we think that's a very important decision for the president. And I wouldn't want to predict what the specific forum will be.
Well, you haven't...
Or forums.
What's that?
Or forums.
Or forums, yes.
Yeah.
Well, you haven't... You acknowledge there hasn't been a news conference in I don't know how long.
Yeah, that's right.
Is he going to start that way?
Yes, it's the president's intention, and it was, quite frankly, in May when I spoke to him, when I first arrived, to launch a program of regular meetings with the press.
You've been here May, June, July, into August, and not one.
That's correct. And the reason being, Mike, that I don't think any of us would be too naive to assume that a conference of that kind that was not first concentrating primarily on Watergate would leave communications in other areas less than desirable.
Well, now wait.
And he has.
He's communicated. He communicated last night at the dinner for Premier Tanaka in a toast. He talked about small, murky, vicious, unimportant little things. Translate, Watergate. Is that your view of Watergate, that it's a small, murky, vicious, unimportant little thing?
I don't think I would give you a value judgment on Watergate. I don't pretend to be an expert. I do think I would say this, Mike. I think in the context of the business of this government, its role internationally, and its mission for the American people, that Watergate has been blown out of context and is today receiving a degree of attention which it does not deserve. Not that I would be one to presume to make value judgments on the evils of what did or did not occur. We must step back at some point and ask ourselves, are we really serving the best interest of the American people and humanity as a whole?
Well, let me ask you this. Are you suggesting that Sam Ervin and his colleagues are not serving the best interests of the country by holding their hearings? Are you saying that the press, at which you, I shouldn't say you, because at which the White House laughed, in a sense, and tried to smear, over a period of months, while a lot of this was coming out, is the press not serving the best interests of this country by pursuing the matter of Watergate? Is it a small, murky, vicious, unimportant little thing?
Again, you've asked me at least 3 questions in one.
Well, it's...
With respect to the Congress, I would be the last one to charge the Congress, the Senate committee especially, particularly, with not serving the best interest of the country. Of course they are. Of course they have an obligation.
Okay.
I couldn't hold them in higher respect for what they're doing and the difficulty of their task.
All right, you've answered that. Now the press.
Now the press, again, of course the press is doing what it should do.
Well, then how is it being blown up? I'm not sure that I understand. You say the Congress is doing a good job, the press is doing a good job, and on the other hand, you say, General Haig, that it's being blown up out of proportion.
I think it has been blown out of proportion by a convergence of a number of circumstances, not the least of which may be our own inadequacy. And when I say that, I mean mine and the administration and those of us who are grappling with this very, very difficult problem at this time.
At issue at this moment, General Haig, are those tapes. If there is nothing to hide, what in the world could better serve all of us than for the president to say, here are the tapes. They prove that I was right. They prove that I was not involved. The American people have the right, not just Bob Haldeman or Steve Bull or Fred Bazart, but the American people have the right to hear those tapes. Let's settle this business.
Well, Mike, I think I can understand very, very easily that kind of a reaction at the initial assessment of the tape issue by anyone. I happen to have made the same assessment.
Oh, you did?
Personally.
You started out,
yes,
you thought that the tape should have been...
Yes. Because, like you and like every American, I was groping for some way to move from this particular atmosphere, which, as I pointed out, I think is distorted and of no real service to the country, and at a very near point in the future, a distinct disservice.
Right.
However, when I sat down with all of the president's senior advisors and his most competent legal counsels, and we carefully reviewed the implications of this matter, both in legal and political terms, and when we looked at the constitutional issue involved, and when we looked at the contribution that these tapes could actually make to arriving at the truth, it was our general conclusion that the tapes would be not a major factor.
Evans and Novak say that Mr. Nixon didn't want anybody new to hear the tape recording of what they call shockingly blunt political conversation in his September 15th meeting with Haldeman and John Dean. Safe in the knowledge that nobody else knew about the tape, Mr. Nixon early in July called on private citizen Haldeman to secretly listen to the tape and report back to him. True or false?
Mike, I sometimes wonder at the clairvoyance of Mr. Evans and Mr. Novak. I will say this, that any president, just as any chief executive of any corporation or any head of any household in America conducts discussions within the inner sanctum or the confines of those with whom he has the greatest exchange and interchange and respect for confidentiality and loyalty. And in discussions of this kind, and let's not be naive about that, any president
is going to say things.
May have said things which, if brought to public consciousness and brought to public light, could do severe damage, not only to the individual, but even more importantly to the institution of the presidency itself.
Okay, that makes sense. But Irvin, Baker, and Cox are not naive.
They are not.
And I dare say trustworthy as well.
Of course they are.
Under those circumstances, the suggestion is made, let those three hear the tapes. Let them filter out what the kind of material that you're talking about, in which candid talk takes place that does not bear upon the situation, really. And then report to the committee or report to the court or whatever on the
Again,
substance of the tapes and whether that says Nixon was right or Dean was right.
Again, Mike, I don't want to portray myself as the spokesman for the administration on value judgments related to the decision on tapes. However, I think there are several things that people tend to lose sight of. First, there has now been a request for selective release of these tapes. And I can assure you that these tapes are intertwined with a number of events. Today, it's the conception, the national conception, that the tapes cover Watergate discussions totally. And I can assure you that many of the meetings for which the tapes have been requested, Watergate was only an incidental aspect of that meeting.
Fine.
Now, were we to make selective release, and this release were, for example, to impeach a witness with all the implications, and they're very serious ones, of such an action, would it not be incumbent upon any defense counsel to insist that all of the material covered in those tapes be relinquished? How could you defend a man and permit him to be implicated and perhaps convicted on a serious charge of perjury without insisting? And there the legal case would be quite simple. The rights of the individual would have to be protected, and then the demand would grow for a release of all the tapes. Now, let me go on, since you pushed my button on this particular question. I don't believe that a selective release of the tapes would satisfy the situation in the present climate. I also believe that total relinquishment of these tapes would generate other problems and set precedents. For example, there are Senate hearings going on bombing of Cambodia. There have been questions within the legislature about the Soviet wheat deal. There have been other allegations about other problems. Why not? Why shouldn't any other committee of the Congress then have equal right to insist on the tapes that covered their particular question under review?
When did you know that the tapes were being made in the presidential offices?
I believe I learned about it in early June. I think the first week in June.
Before it was known in the press?
Yes.
Why were you told? Because you took Haldeman's job and you had to know about its going on?
Yes, the president told me.
Kissinger didn't know?
No, I don't believe he knew, no. But you'll have to ask Henry. I'm quite certain he did not know.
Why did you have to know?
Well, I had to know because the system, as currently underway, came under my predecessor's supervision, so to speak.
Yeah, but why would you have to know? I mean, the system was all set up. Why would you have to know?
Well, the product was obviously being produced continuously and had to be stored. There had to be records. Someone had to be responsible.
Were you responsible for them tapes?
I am not now, but
were
in
you
a sense
then?
I sort of felt when I once learned about them and knew that my predecessor was aware of them, I felt a sense of responsibility for them. And as I feel for anything that happens or doesn't happen in the White House in my present job, I must feel responsible.
It had nothing to do with the fact that saying, Al, be careful, says the president. Al, be careful, you're being taped. I mean, you're being taped for posterity in here or for who knows what.
Mike, in the business I've been in, the number of contacts I've had abroad and meetings with foreign leaders, I always proceed with the assumption that that's a very real possibility.
John Ehrlichman testified before the Watergate Committee that the president has the right to commit a crime if the national security is involved. And when asked by Senator Talmadge if that included murder, Ehrlichman said it would be difficult to draw the line. And you smile.
Yeah. No, I smile out of your ingenuity to draw me into sensitive areas. I wouldn't presume to elaborate on the discussion that took place in the committee hearing with respect to this subject.
Well, do you agree that the president should have the right to burgle, or to order, not to burgle, but to order burglary, or to order murder, if necessary, in what he perceives to be?
I don't think the president would even consider such a thing. under any circumstances. But I
Well,
also think this. I think that precedents have been set in the past, and it has been normal practice for certain steps to have been authorized in the national security area, which could run counter to the legal mores of our own society.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I can talk about breaking and entering.
Where?
These are highly sensitive subjects, but in terms of diplomatic activity, it has been authorized historically in our country by presidents.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I am not going to join that great club of Americans who seem to feel that it helps us to talk about these things. All I will say at this point, Mike, is that it has occurred, and where it has occurred, there have been illegal acts authorized.
Breaking and entering under recent previous presidents. You're chief of staff of the White House. Let's say that tomorrow you learned that Anthony Ulasewicz, or somebody like him, had been hired by one of your subordinates to check up on the drinking habits and the sexual habits, if you will, of a political opponent. What would you do?
Well, I don't think that's the kind of thing that I'd tolerate.
You'd fire him?
I don't think that that's appropriate business for the White House.
General Haig told us he himself has not heard the tapes. He learned about their contents from the president.
If you sometimes suffer from acid indigestion or heartburn, this powerful little medicine brings quick relief. But more than that, we took the sprightliest peppermint, the liveliest lemon, the tangiest orange, the cool, sweet, simulated flavors of wintergreen and cherry, and squeezed each into a Tums. Tums gives you quick, dependable relief. Who said medicine has to taste bad to be good? Get Tums.
Spread a little strength, spread a lot of cheer, ain't a lot of happiness, spread a little spread, brighten up your life, spread a lot that's new, spread on Glidden Spread.
Spread satin, nearly 3,000 colors, most cover in one coat, and cleanup's easy with water.
Go ahead, spread a little spread.
Spread on Glidden Spread.
The Watergate drama has thrown up to the American audience a whole cast of characters who only a few months ago were either unknown or known only to a few Washington insiders. Well, tonight we profile one of them, Senator Daniel K. Inouye, the sober senator from Hawaii, whose tough questioning of John Ehrlichman and H.R. Haldeman led their attorney, John Wilson, to refer to him as that little Jap. True, Inouye had, in a stage whisper heard by millions of people, called John Ehrlichman a liar. True, he had dredged up some questionable campaign activities conducted by Bob Haldeman way back in 1962. The little Jap remark, despite Mr. Wilson's denials, was clearly a racial slur, which, considering the presence of Japanese Premier Tanaka in Washington, must have been somewhat embarrassing to the president. Well, just who is the Senator Attorney Wilson called that little Jap? We went to Washington to talk to him. He began by recalling his first days as a congressman.
Well, you must appreciate this. This was my first day as a member of the House. I'm sitting across one of the world's most powerful men, Speaker of the House, Sam Rayburn. And he's looking at me in all his severity. He's a young fella. I want you to know that in Washington, D.C., I'm the best-known fella. Everyone knows Sam Rayburn. I says, oh, yes, Mr. Speaker, everyone in the world knows Sam Rayburn. He says, no, not that far, but in Washington, I am number one. And next to me, you'll be the best known. And so I looked at him, Mr. Speaker, you know, well, what do you mean by that? He says, well, young fella, there are not too many one-armed Japanese congressmen.
Daniel Inouye has been case-hardened by life. The slums of Honolulu, where he was born, are now a bittersweet memory. Today he lives in comfort in suburban Maryland. 30-odd years ago, he set out to prove that he was as loyal an American as anyone. In the process, he won the Distinguished Service Cross, and he left an arm behind on the battlefields of Italy.
Oh, this was about 48 hours after I lost my arm, and this nurse came by, and she says, Lieutenant, do you want a cigarette? I says, oh, yes, ma'am. So she threw a brand new pack at me. And I looked at her, and I wanted to curse her because I felt she should open the pack for me. So for the first time in my life, I opened a pack with one hand. With my teeth, just bit it off. Finally got the cigarette out, I put it in my mouth, and she came by, and she says, oh, you need a light. And she tossed a book of matches at me, and she walked away. About then, I was ready to throw rocks at her. And I tried to light this match, and nearly burnt myself, and I gave up, and she came by again, and she said, you quit smoking? That's a good thing, you know. Smoking's not good for you. And so I said, why don't you light it for me? She looked at me and says, you know, I'm not going to be around you all the time. No one's going to be following you all your life to light your cigarettes and tie your shoelaces. You know, you're big enough. You're not a baby. You better learn how to do things. And so she took out a book of matches, and she said, all you got to do is to bend it forward like this, and then flick. There it was. From then on, I became completely self-reliant. A few things I can do better than men with both arms. The rehabilitation program in the hospital required all of us to take up some musical instrument. And I tried the trumpet first because you can do it one hand. But then the instructor said, no, you're hopeless. Your lips are too soft. So I looked around and I saw this piano teacher. He was a black fella, and he just had one arm. And so he and I got along famously, and in 2 months I had my graduation. And so he wanted to know, what song do you propose to play for your graduation? And I've got a big ego, so I said, Danny Boy, naturally.
Inouye may be the all-American senator, but his family life is played by traditional Japanese rules. In this Watergate summer, his wife remains with Daniel Jr. in Hawaii. Like his father before him, the senator is positive about a woman's place.
He insisted that my mother stay at home. He refused to have her go out to work. He felt that it was her job to care for the children. So I come from a very traditional, conservative background.
Do you keep that up in your own household, or a form of that?
Some of my friends call me, well, they're the women's lib friends, call me one of those pig names. I insist that my wife stay at home, and she agrees with me. She cares for our son, and this is a full-time job.
Inouye is an American because his grandfather left Japan for Hawaii to find work, to make money, to pay off a family debt of honor. It is called on in Japan, the concept of face. He is a Methodist because his mother was an orphan and raised by Christian missionaries.
It would have been unheard of on her part to have married anything but a Methodist. And here was my father, a Buddhist, and he fell in love with her. And she must have told her in no uncertain terms, you want to marry me, you become a Methodist. And so, in fact, when I was named, she was intent upon naming me Daniel, but she had to get, some reassurance from the Almighty. So she closed the Bible and she opened it up, and it opened to the book of Daniel. She said, that's it.
Young Danny grew up in two cultures, Japanese at home, American in the streets. He and his friends were always pretending that their skin was white and their eyes were blue.
Race or racism was a very important factor in your lives.
Oh, yes. we knew what we were, and we knew what the circumstances were at that time. We wanted desperately to be Americans. We wanted desperately to have other Americans look upon us as Americans. And many of us concluded, especially those of us in the college level, that the only way to do this was to volunteer for military service. We were unfit for service by the rule of the Department of the Army.
You mean as Japanese?
Oh, yes. We were considered 4E, I believe, which was not quite 4F. But, so we could have sat this war out, but we felt imperative that we go through this demonstration of loyalty and allegiance.
Inouye was 17 when the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor.
It was a Sunday. We had gotten up, as we do every Sunday, to get ready for church services. I turned on my little radio, and suddenly the voice of a very frantic announcer telling us about the bombing, that this is not a test, it is not a maneuver, this is the real thing, we are being attacked. And so my father and I went out on the street, and we lived several miles from Pearl Harbor, but you could see the anti-aircraft puffs in the Pearl Harbor area. And one group of aircraft just zoomed over our area, and you looked up there and you saw the red ball, the rising sun.
What did you feel yourself, though, as a young man of 17? Did you feel torn apart by a sense of divided loyalty or of guilt because of what had come from your ancestors?
I had no divided loyalty as far as I was concerned. I immediately looked upon Japan as my enemy, my personal enemy. In many ways, I felt that the people of my ancestry had betrayed us, because we had looked upon this country as a great country.
But to white America, it was a question of loyalty. And Japanese Americans on the West Coast were rounded up and relocated in camps.
I know how my comrades felt, those who had been uprooted from their homes on the West Coast and herded off into racetracks, concentration camps. I used to always, and I still marvel over the fact that these men volunteered from behind barbed wires. Now, I always ask myself, would I have done the same thing? Now, you must remember, our circumstances were a bit different in Hawaii. Our neighbors were friendly, and no one pointed fingers at us. But in California, it was a different thing. And they were all herded into these camps, and yet they volunteered in large numbers, and they fought well. I still recall a sergeant in my platoon who was killed by a grenade, and almost precisely at that moment, his home was being burnt by vigilantes in California.
The Japanese-American regiment, the 442nd, was nicknamed Go for Broke. It was the most decorated combat outfit in the Second World War. It took the highest casualties. On the battlefields of Italy, Inouye was raised from private to sergeant to lieutenant. Days before the war ended, a grenade blew away his right arm. He was sent home. And before presenting himself to his family, he stopped off for a haircut in California.
I was in an officer's uniform. I had 4 rows of ribbons. I had my officer's bars. A big, bona fide hero. So I walked in. One barber approached me and he says, what are you? I says, what am I? I need a haircut. He says, you're a Jap? I says, no, I'm an American. He says, but you're a Jap? I says, well, if you mean what my parents were, I said, yeah, my father was born in Japan. We don't cut Jap hair here. Well, I would have expected that in 1942 or 43, but this is 45. The war's over. At that point, I didn't know what to do. I had a hook in where my hand used to be. I thought, well, should I slug him or break up the place? But then I thought, now, if I slugged him, then everything I had done up until now would have been wasted. So I just looked at him. I says, I feel sorry for you, and I walked out.
The kid from the slums came home a changed man. He went to war speaking pidgin English. In hospital, fellow officers decided to make him over.
And they figured I might be a good Pygmalion. Eliza Doolittle. And so there was a fellow who taught public speaking. He had a master's degree. He was a regular college instructor. He grabbed hold of me. There was another one who taught me how to play bridge. Another one taught me how to lay out the silver on a table. Another one taught me how to order wine. They wanted to develop a gentleman. So when I returned home in my captain's uniform with all the ribbons, that in itself must have been most impressive to my folks. I had left home in an ill-fitting private's uniform. Here I am, driven home by a chauffeur in a captain's uniform. And when I began speaking, my mother looked at me and she said, "You speak just like a haole," which means a white man.
A Japanese white man was also the perfect candidate to represent the 250,000 Japanese Hawaiians as the territory approached statehood. He won a seat to the House, then to the Senate. In 1968, he was re-elected with a phenomenal 83% majority. His record was liberal and predictable, a party regular.
During that period when you did support the war in Vietnam, were you Lyndon Johnson's man?
I would put it this way: the president was very generous with his time with me. He was good to me. I looked upon him, as I still do, as a friend. I liked him very much. I had the honor of seconding his nomination in Los Angeles. This is when we lost. I must say that my support for Vietnam was in some sense conditioned by my friendship. I would be less than candid if I said otherwise.
Is that an extension of the Japanese sense of obligation?
Very definitely, sir. And to say now that I would have done otherwise would be not only less than candid, I think, be intellectually dishonest with you.
It was the massacre at My Lai that changed Daniel Inouye's mind about the war. My Lai seemed to end whatever obligation he felt.
At that time, people of the United States were made aware of this My Lai incidents. Now, I had gone through combat, and I received a field commission as an infantry officer. And an infantry officer gets a field commission generally because he's a good soldier. What is a good soldier? One who kills very efficiently, who knows how to do the business of an infantryman. And I suppose for the rest of my life I'll have to go along knowing that I killed very many men. But never during my service as an infantry sergeant or an officer or a rifleman would I have ever considered shooting a woman, an old lady, or children. And here we had a situation where women and children were lined up like animals and just shot cold-bloodedly. And then when I began adding the common use of gooks, sloops, and the fact that they were looked upon as inferior people, I couldn't help but feeling that there was an unfortunate element of racism involved. That's when I said, I've had it.
Daniel K. Inouye is an unabashed patriot whose American patriotism is enriched by his Japanese sense of honor.
When I left Hawaii to put on the uniform, my father took his day off. He asked his boss may he take the morning off. And he accompanied me on a streetcar to the point of embarkation to get on the trucks to go to the camp. And he was unusually very quiet. Well, there isn't much you can talk about when you're leaving like this. The only thing he told me was, remember, the country's been good to you. So you have a home you got to pay back.
So much for the senator who the distinguished Washington attorney John Wilson called that little Jap.
You're watching Racing History in the Making. Richard Petty in the STP Oil Treatment Special on his way to an unprecedented 4th NASCAR Grand National Championship. One big reason he won, he didn't take chances with his engine. He got the racer's edge with STP Oil Treatment. And so can you. Add STP to your oil. Make Richard Petty's edge your edge.
Frank asked me the other day if I knew the name of an interpreter who speaks insurance. Imagine that. He said he was thinking about buying some life insurance and he wanted to make sure he knew what he was getting. I told him about Northwestern Mutual Life. How they're the 7th largest in the country, but they don't push you into anything. How they listen to you and then make sure you know what you're getting. You know what he asked me for then? Their phone number.
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
This portion of 60 Minutes has been sponsored by
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
"60 Minutes will continue after station identification. This fall, watch for the new Perry Mason, starring Monty Markham in the title role, Sunday evenings on CBS.
This is Joseph Benty in the KNXT newsroom. A 100-year-old building collapsed in New York. Police are still looking for bodies, and the Rams and the Cowboys are playing at this moment. No score.
Newsroom with Joe Benty, tonight at 11. Every night at Magic Mountain, you can enjoy cool breezes, fabulous entertainment, fireworks, all kinds of wild new excitement. Come on up to Magic Mountain.
Or buy from Thomas Cadillac, downtown on 7th at the Harbor Freeway. We want your business. Please call 629-8175.
I asked the gentleman, where can we go for a little peace and quiet? He says, Mr. Fields, I've got just the place. Peaceful little cottage nestled in the heart of the Mellow Mountain. My head, my stomach, I need some Alka-Seltzer.
When you have these upsets, Alka-Seltzer will neutralize the acid in your stomach and relieve your headache, too.
Alka-Seltzer, it's the greatest.
Sure, I used my denture adhesive this morning, but I'll probably use it again today.
Maybe you need a different kind of adhesive.
Like what?
Use Super Polygrip. It has a plastic formula. Look, here's how it holds. Your gum, your denture. Super Polygrip bonds them together with thousands of interlocking plastic filaments.
Super Polygrip? That ought to hold me.
New Super Polygrip for extra hold. Regular Polygrip.
Our summer game is baseball. To England and a good part of what was her empire, the summer game is cricket. It's a game that stumps all foreigners. It's part ritual and part sport. It's not considered bad form, for example, for fans to fall asleep. Indeed, even the players occasionally fall victim to boredom. Well, tonight we try to understand the other summer game.
A normal cricket match takes 5 days to play. Each day's session lasts 8 hours, including various lunch and tea intervals. And after all that, it's not uncommon to have no result. There is something about cricket that makes it impossible to be played by anyone but Englishmen. Englishmen and their colonial airs. It was not always the aristocratic game that many people today believe it to be. In the early days, it was a big betting game with all kinds of outlandish permutations. 11 one-legged men versus 11 one-armed men. The one-armed men won. 11 ladies of Hampshire of varying weights and sizes versus 11 equally varied ladies from Surrey. 16 Australian Aborigine boomerang throwers captained by a man named Dick-a-Dick versus the best of England, and the famous team of 11 aristocrats, fielded by Lord Baldwin of Bewdley versus 72 Wiltshire Bakers. The rules cover many pages of parchment, so to further clarify the game, I'll try to put cricket in baseball terms. There are two batters, both up at the same time, but only one is pitched to at a time. He scores a run by hitting the ball and reaching the other wicket before the throw from the outfield reaches the wicket and knocks it down. The wicket, by the way, consists of 3 upright sticks, or stumps, supporting 2 smaller sticks, or bails. If he can keep hitting the ball well, or if he can simply protect his own wicket from the pitcher, then the same batter can bat all day, or even all week if he's good enough. The cricket version of a home run is a hit for 6, which is a fly ball that goes over the boundary without bouncing. That's 6 runs. The batter can be called out if he is caught on the fly, or he can be out if a fielder knocks down the stumps before he reaches the wicket. That's called being stumped. But the most common way of being out is to be clean bowled. That is, the pitcher, with brilliant use of spin and bounce, knocks down the wicket despite the batter's attempts to protect it. After 10 of the 11 men are out, they change sides.
There is the small bar over there, which is...
William Rushton, former parliamentary candidate, political observer, and ex-cricketer, has a reputation for being able to synthesize and simplify the arcane rules and rituals of the summer game.
And how many runs in an average game? You would hope to see, I suppose, about 250, 260 in the course of a day. That's a fair day. I mean, once they start, about 11:30 they come out. You would hope they would score about 80 runs before lunch. They have quite a long lunch, about an hour's lunch. Come out again, slows off a bit, but I think they'd hope again to get 80 to 100 before breaking for tea, about 4:30, 4:45, when the tea's ready. And then after tea, there's about another 2 hours, which you'd hope again to see about 80 more, I would think, before the cocktail hour. Yeah, about sort of 250. You'd also hope to see some wickets fall, which is where the fielding side comes in.
Well, hold on.
Yes.
Wickets fall.
Yes, wickets falling. There are, as I've already explained, at either end of the 22-yard pitch, wickets. So if people are out, you'd say, a wicket has fallen. It may not have fallen. The man may have been caught somewhere over there. I mean, the wicket is still intact, but is described as having fallen, even if it hasn't. You also, the pitch is referred to as the wicket. You say, my word, that's a sticky wicket. Which means the pitch is damp, the sunlight is playing upon it, and therefore you bring on your googly bowlers, you'll come on the best possible results from it. Googlies are right-handed Chinamen, really, which may come as a bit of a shock to all right-handed Chinamen. I'm very sorry. So they're watching. It's a deceptive spin. It goes the other way. So, of course, the right-handed Chinaman. The first thing this gentleman is going to get when he goes out there as a batsman, he's going to stand there, take up his guard, so he's standing right in front of his stumps, positioned roughly thus, looking aggressive, English, determined. Up comes his fast bowler from about 40 yards, bowling for it at about 90 miles an hour. He's surrounded by fielders. He's got slips, gullies, short legs just behind him here, long legs further away, long stops straight down there, long on, mid-on, all waiting for him to hit the ball towards them.
Googlies, silly mid-offs, short legs, long stops. Even if this makes no sense to you, it makes perfect sense to every schoolboy in England and Australia, India, Pakistan, Ceylon, and the West Indies. At Lord's Cricket Ground in London, they learn the fundamentals of the game.
Full face of the back to the ball. Play that one. That's a good shot. Well done.
The long room at Lord's is the inner sanctum of cricket. It is populated by a committee of men whose names were put down for membership long before they were born. They enforce the rules of the game. Nearby rests the holy grail of cricket, a 5-inch high earthenware pot containing indeed some ashes, the residue of an English wicket burned by a victorious Australian team a millennium ago. In spite of the absence of a more generous prize, cricket is big business in places where it's played. Only the best English ash for the bats.
And for the balls, well, this man, Thomas Twort, T-W-O-R-T, is England's principal ball maker. The leather balls he makes and dyes red in his trusty saucepan are as hard as baseballs and caught bare-handed. Serious injuries are not uncommon. What sort of pay does a professional cricketer get?
I should think he's lucky if he pulls in about, doing your money, about $2,000 a year. I would think $2,000, $3,000 a year. There are no sort of perks on the side, really. Cricket isn't that sort of game.
Do you think there's any chance that a game like cricket could surpass baseball and catch on in the United States?
No, I don't think so. You're more instant than we are. You're sort of instant coffee and instant this and instant that, and I don't think you could sit there for 5 days. An English team has just been out to play a series of internationals against Pakistan. They must have travelled some 20,000 miles. They have played 3 5-day games. 15 days have been spent from 11:30 in the morning to 7:30 at night. No result whatsoever. Nobody won, nobody lost. The crowd was in a frenzy.
Well, why on earth play it? If no one seems particularly surprised if it's a draw or a tie, as you call it.
I don't see
why.
People have been asking that question for hundreds of years. I don't see why you think I'm going to get an answer.
Would you be offended if I suggested that, in fact, cricket is a rather primitive form of baseball?
I would. Oh, it's an extremely sophisticated form of war, actually, cricket. It contains all the ingredients, I think. There's no sex, but there's plenty of violence on its day.
Seldom have we received so much angry mail as we got following our story on military retirement, pensions, and benefits. Most of it from military retirees and their wives who felt that we had taken an editorial position against them. One viewer asked, why did you zero in on military retired people and leave out federal and state employees? Several letters were in this vein. If it's such a good deal, why isn't everyone in the military service? The wife of an Air Force sergeant complained, the military retirement plan makes me sick. The retired serviceman should not be entitled to the same full benefits as the active military are. And another viewer wrote, retired generals should be ashamed of themselves for collecting all that disability money when men all over the country are in understaffed veterans hospitals. But the wife of a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel wrote, if military aircraft were privately owned, pilots would receive $60,000 per year, and their retirement pension would be $25,000 per year, and you would probably be a major stockholder. And finally, there was this. We'd be interested to know what CBS is going to give you when you grow too old to work. It's an interesting question. I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Morley Safer. We'll be back next Friday night with another edition of 60 Minutes.
I guess you'd need an unusual reason to buy something from a company you'd never heard of, right? Have you ever heard of Northwestern Mutual Life? Could be you haven't. And yet the Northwestern has grown to be the 7th largest life insurance company in America. So policy owners like me must be saying a lot of good things to a lot of people. And that's pretty unusual, isn't it?
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
Hello, I'm the Steak Supreme chef.
What are you doing in my dining room?
I'm getting people to try a new Steak Supreme steak sauce.
Mild, I taste the meat and the sauce.
Sir?
It is new, richer. It's mild and mellow. The flavor of the meat comes through.
My new Steak Supreme is so great on steaks. Imagine it on hamburgers, chops.
Pot roast?
Sensational. New Steak Supreme. At last, a great steak sauce that's mild and mellow. Look for the chef on the label.
I like luxury cars. I like the room, reclining bucket seats, tinted glass, carpeting, all the things that make a luxury car a pleasure to drive. Have you looked at the price of luxury cars lately? And gasoline? That's why you should own a 610. It's all the luxury you want at a price you can afford. And still gets around 25 miles per gallon. A Datsun 610, a luxury economy car. An idea whose time has come.
You are about to witness a crime. Teams like this are one way 1 million travelers will lose their money this year. This is the squeeze play.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Watch again. Protect your vacation. Instead of cash, carry American Express traveler's checks. If they're stolen or lost, you can get them replaced usually on the same day. Insist on American Express traveler's checks.
Discover America's back roads where individualism still thrives and meet some of the nation's most unusual people. Travel on the road with Charles Kuralt tonight at 9, 8 Central on CBS.
Now for the housewife with heartburn who's washing her dishes in the bathroom because her sink is clogged and the plumber hasn't come. For the plumber with heartburn who hasn't come because he's waiting delivery of the K7 wrench he needs to declog sinks. For the businessman with heartburn whose shipment of K7 wrenches is sitting on a railroad siding in Duluth, Alka 2, the antacid tablet built to fall apart. Chews easy, chews fast, and it works fast too. Cool and creamy, not as chalky, not as gritty. Alka 2, chews fast, and it works fast too.
Head straight for Gold Key Parking Lot. We're so overstocked and bursting at the seams, we're running a sale right in our parking lot. We're overstocked and bursting with beautiful bedrooms. We're overstocked at Gold Key with living rooms in every style and fabric. Jam-packed with sensational Gold Key dining room savings. Spilling over with famous name mattresses, all at new low Gold Key prices. Take it home with you and save. Hurry to the Gold Key Parking Lot. Take advantage of our overstocked warehouse and save right now.
KNXT, Los Angeles, 9 o'clock.
Because of the following special broadcasts, the CBS Friday night movies will not be presented this evening.